Happy to be back for our weekly briefing. It's been another tough week in the city. As I said yesterday, our city is really hurting right now. A number of challenges. Everybody settled? Okay. But as difficult a week as it's been, I was driving to work this morning. The sun was shining, and there were more people downtown than there has been in months, and it gave me some hope that we can get things back on track here in the community. So we're going to cover a number of topics. We are, of course, I want to recognize our Deputy Mayor Sharon Owens with us as usual, and Chief Kenton Buckner. I want to thank the Common Council for the use of the chambers. And again, going to cover a number of topics. We'll talk about COVID-19. We are still in the midst of a global pandemic. I'm going to talk a little bit more about our workforce and how we're managing the multiple crises, both of course, the health crisis and the fiscal crisis. I'm going to talk about the census because we do that every week. And then we're going to talk about police-community relations and about the specific incident that happened a couple weeks ago with the photographer in front of the public safety building. So the chief's going to speak to that. Okay, so COVID. Some information we thought was useful to share, understanding that the county executive provides his updated numbers daily for the entire county. Looking at the city numbers, through June 11th, total number of cases is 1,343. That's up 82 cases over the past week. The average is just a little over 11 per day. And that's a 6.5% increase week to week. Good news is we have 709 recoveries, and that's up 108 over the past week. So that's a 17.8% increase in recoveries. So the growth of the recoveries is significantly outpacing growth in new cases, and that's an encouraging trend that we hope will continue. I want to thank everyone involved in the mobile testing, including the county and our other partners. We were at Grant Middle School up on the north side on Tuesday and Blessed Sacrament in Eastwood on Thursday. Hopefully we'll have updates on future locations throughout the city. But as always, we are testing at the Syracuse Community Health Center today and Saturday until 5 p.m. I have heard from some residents, given the fact that there was an incident nearby there was a stabbing. Obviously, that's scary for everyone involved, but I want to reiterate it is very safe at the Syracuse Community Health Center. We have security, and I want to encourage people to continue to come down and to get tested. But again, we will try to keep the mobile testing moving around the community to give people many options. I think I did know within the past week or so that I myself was tested, and I did get a negative result back on that, so that was certainly good news, but something that we need to continue to be vigilant about. Also related to COVID, we are officially, as of today, in phase 3 of the state's reopening process. I want to congratulate the community for doing the right thing, keeping our numbers down and putting us in a position where we can reopen to phase 3. So I think that is why we are seeing more activity downtown, and we hope to see that continue. As of the report we received this past Wednesday, 359 businesses within the city of Syracuse have affirmed that they were ready to reopen, and there's 1,265 countywide. That includes the city numbers. We continue to monitor the data regularly. I want to remind people this is a data-driven process and one that we believe in. The state, a few weeks back, did introduce a new tool. You can see it on the screen behind me. They call it the COVID-19 Early Warning Monitoring System Dashboard, and it monitors things, metrics like testing and contact tracing capacity, new infections and cases, severity of infections, including hospitalizations. That's what you see on the screen. So you see a downward trend, some small upticks, but overall downward trend on hospitalizations, which again is why we are in the position we are in to continue with the reopening process. It also looks at hospital capacity. So I encourage people to get on the state's website. It's forward.ny.gov. Inform yourself. There's a lot of good data out there, and it's useful for a number of reasons. But again, just a reminder, things are going in the right direction, but it is not the time to let our guard down. We need to continue to do the things that have gotten us this far, and I would encourage everyone to do just that. So I mentioned that in addition to the health crisis, we are dealing with a fiscal crisis here in the city of Syracuse, certainly not unique to the city. I know Onondaga County is looking at some difficult decisions, but we do need to continue to make decisions that allow us to deliver services effectively and efficiently to our constituents, and those decisions are increasingly difficult. Back in May, we announced that we were placing 104 employees on temporary unpaid leave. Today we're announcing that we have launched a voluntary leave without pay program for city employees. We've laid out the options. We're going to help our employees procure unemployment insurance and the supplemental federal benefit. Again, we want to see how we do with voluntary before any additional actions. Our goal is to get to at least 50 additional city employees on temporary leave without pay. If we can do better than that, we certainly will. And again, this is intended to achieve some short-term savings as we await assistance from the federal government, which is desperately needed. So the goal here was, again, to make it voluntary, to help people control their own destiny, to reduce the disruption to work and to services. But again, these decisions are only going to get harder going forward. And that's where we are on that. I want to thank our collective bargaining units for working with us on this process. They're an important partner for us, and between our units and department heads, we were able to get to this point. So the additional 50 we anticipate will save us about $23,000 per week. So going out to July, somewhere in the $160,000 range. So when you add that to the anticipated savings from the 104, we're getting near $500,000 in savings. So nowhere near the numbers that we're talking about in terms of lost revenue, but every bit helps. Again, I mentioned the census. We know how important that is in driving a lot of federal resources to the community. We are still seeing some progress, but it is slowing. Our self-response rate as of June 10th is 48.7, up from 48.4. Still continue to be in line with our upstate counterparts. Buffalo's at 48.8, Rochester's at 46.8, and Albany's at 49. We need to do better. So again, whether we're talking about the pandemic, whether we're talking about the protests, the violence in our community, there's a lot of challenges that we're facing as a community and as a city. And one way in which everyone can help us address those challenges is by filling out your census. So please, if you have not done so, please do that. We'll get into crime, and then I'll turn it over to Chief Buckner. But again, we've been looking at our weekly COMPSTAT reports. I want to remind everyone that they are available on syracusepolice.org, so people can go and look at them. They are updated every Tuesday, so the numbers you see in front of you are through June 8. So unfortunately, one of the numbers that is not updated on there that needs to be is we've had 2 more homicides since the report was issued, so we're up to 13 homicides in the city of Syracuse. So that does put us above where we were last year, right around the 5-year average, nowhere near where we want to be. And again, very upsetting on a number of different fronts. The good news is we continue year over year to be down overall in Part 1 crime. We're down 8%. Last week we were down 9%. So we are seeing we're slipping there a little bit. We want to try to hold firm. Our Part 1 violent crime is 4% below where it was last year, and Part 1 property crime is 8% below. So that's overall still a good thing that crime is down, but it certainly didn't feel that way this week. And again, specifically with violent crime, we have a lot of work to do. A lot of discussion about police-community relations. I talked quite a bit last week at the briefing about the actions that we've taken so far, that this is an area that has been a priority for me, a priority for Chief Buckner, Deputy Mayor Owens. from the moments we walked through the doors, and we've made good progress. We tried to summarize that progress in a one-page document and a fact sheet that we are sharing on a number of different fronts, not to suggest that we've done enough. We have a lot of work to do, but to make sure that as we're having debates and dialogues about how we improve police-community relations, how we improve police accountability, and also ultimately achieve police reform, we want to start with a common set of information in terms of what we've done, hopefully show those that are expressing concerns about these issues that we do take them seriously and we have made progress, but also that we acknowledge that there's a lot of work to be done. I think it's also important to note that even when you have the mayor and the deputy mayor and the police chief working for reform, there are barriers even for us. As an example, we talked about the attempt to change the disciplinary process and to put the authority solely in Chief Buckner's hands, where it should be. Right now, or at least up until we took this action, it was subject to arbitration, and we didn't believe that was the best approach. But we did receive a decision in court that didn't support our position that discipline belonged, per the second-class cities law, in the hands of the chief and be subject to an open, transparent process. But I had indicated, and I do want to confirm, that we are appealing that decision and are going to continue to fight for appropriate discipline that ensures everyone is held accountable. I also mentioned that at the federal level that we are opposing the Justice Department's attempts to lift the consent order on diversity in hiring. We are not where we need to be yet. We are going to work very hard to diversify our police department, regardless of the federal government telling us that we have to through a consent decree. But the reality is the consent order is a tool that we can use to help us diversify the police department, and that's a tool that we don't want to lose. So we're going to continue to fight that battle on the federal front. Again, when you look at the document, you'll see we broke it up into different categories. We've talked a lot about policies. I want to remind people that we did revise our use of force policy last year, but we're looking at it. We're going to continue to look at it, make sure that we're aligned with best practices. Body-worn cameras, we have that policy. We've talked about those recently, and we're pushing to continue to increase the number of cameras so every officer out in the community has one on, and a number of other policies. We've also looked at training, ongoing community engagement, and accountability and transparency, especially around discipline. So that work continues, and I had a conversation with the governor's office today and was given a quick briefing on the governor's executive order around police reform. During that conversation, the governor's representative acknowledged that we were already on this path, and so we welcome the opportunity to continue that work in line with the governor's executive order. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Buckner. The chief is going to briefly address the status of the investigation on the officer-involved shooting, and then is going to provide an update on the investigation into the May 30 incident involving a member of the Syracuse Police Department Public Order Unit and a news photographer. So, Chief, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm going to step out of the way here for the presentation.
All right. Good afternoon. So there are no additional updates at this time on our officer-involved shooting. We did give the two press briefings as of yesterday. We continue to conduct our investigation, which includes both an administrative and criminal investigation that will ultimately be turned over to our district attorney's office. As we learn more about the case, and without trying to impact the integrity of that investigation, we will share more information. I will now go into what has been the subject of much discussion and concern involving an incident with one of our police officers that came in contact with a member of the press, specifically Syracuse.com. So first, I would like to thank everyone for their patience. I apologize for the amount of time that it has taken for us to provide this official response. It is our goal today to provide you a complete picture of what occurred during an interaction between one of our officers and a member of the press, specifically Syracuse.com. After receiving a complaint and a 3-second video from the leadership at the paper, we immediately began our investigation. There are multiple camera angles, including body-worn cameras, that will provide additional footage for the incident that was discovered during our investigation. We interviewed Sergeant Todd Kramer, David Nett, and 2 citizens as a part of this investigation. I will share my decision at the completion of our very brief presentation that we have here for you today. As a matter of introduction, I will tell you that Sergeant Todd Kramer has 20 years of service with the police department and was promoted to the rank of sergeant in 2006. On May the 30th of 2020, the police department provided traffic control to peaceful protesters who were marching throughout the city. At approximately 9:30 p.m. on South State Street, the streets became flooded with a group of people and cars who were clearly more energized and appeared to be more agitated. The tone of the audience, it was clear it had changed from the peaceful, lawful protesters that had been there throughout the day. People were in the streets, dirt bikes and ATVs were being driven on the sidewalks, and then there was the beginning of some fireworks that individuals were lighting. We were monitoring the crowd, and we started to receive calls from 911 regarding the destruction of property. I will now turn this over to Sergeant Mark Russin, who will go over the 5 slides that we have for you that we think will illustrate as to what happened on the night in question.
Good afternoon. Just walk through very briefly some of, to give you some orientation for each slide. So in this is a camera that the police department has. You're looking from the south towards the north. At the top of the screen here, just so you can orientate yourself, would be the public safety building. So this is the planters in front of the public safety building. And then this is the courthouse up here. This is the initial, this is approximately 9:34 in the evening. This will be the first wave of what we saw to be violent acts towards the buildings and the property. So you'll see in this video, members of this group start to move towards the front of the building, and then sometime during this period, they'll start to move away from the building. And you can roll the video, please, Greg. At this time, the group starts to move here towards the public safety building, but then also at the top center of the screen towards the actual courthouse. And this is the first time that the windows on both the courthouse, the public safety building, and ultimately the Justice Center started to be broken out from those various locations. As I mentioned earlier, the crowd starts to move away from the building. At this time, no officers had been actually deployed outside, so all the officers remained in the building at this time, and we were just monitoring the crowd. In this next slide, it will be some 911 radio transmission. So it'll be actually the radio transmissions that. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. We went to a different slide. So we'll actually go. This is the lobby camera for the interior of the public safety building. So this is looking out through the glass windows. At the top center of the screen, you will see that the one of the windows has already been cracked right here. In this area on the runner carpet, you'll see the glass shards that from a broken window that was up in that would be up in this general area that's not captured on the screen at the time. So this would be the movement towards the front of the building. You can go ahead and roll the video, please, sir. You'll see at the center there, someone is trying to break out the window with a baseball bat. And in a moment, you'll also see a gentleman in blue jeans and a black jacket to be Mr. Net, come in and start to take pictures of the actual the damage being done to the glass. At one point here, you can see Mr. Net. I'll just point out to him, Mr. Net here taking pictures. A large piece of the glass right here ends up breaking off here in a few seconds, and then you'll see the crowd actually start to pull away from that area and move backwards. And in a moment here, you'll also see the first squad, if you will, of the members of the public order unit come into the public safety building to protect this area. At the time, if you're familiar with the public safety building, we have our lobby area there, and there's civilians that work the front desk who had not been evacuated out of the building at the time. This is the, as I just described, the first wave just to hold the front of the public safety building. And in a moment here, you can see Mr. Net is taking pictures of this first squad of officers. You'll see from this area coming onto the screen, so from right to left, you'll see another wave of officers come out and form a line in front of the public safety buildings. Those officers were in the courtyard area of the public safety building and came out between a gate between the district attorney's office or the courthouse and then out in towards the front of the public safety building. There's approximately 6 officers that go past Mr. Net. You'll see one of the officers marked has police on the back of his police uniform, and on that you'll see it's gold in color as opposed to the white. That will be Sergeant Todd Kramer, and he'll come out, and then you will see the interaction between Mr. Net and Sergeant Kramer. In the next video, you'll hear the audio. There's a body-worn camera video, and you'll hear the audio of the interaction as well. This is the interaction between Mr. Net, as you can see, and Sergeant Kramer with the gold marking on the back of his police uniform in police, indicating that he is a supervisor. And you can continue to roll the video, please. This time they're just forming a line, and you will see in this video, but then also in the body-worn camera video, that the officers were taking objects. Things were still being thrown at the officers at the time. Could go to the next video, sir. This is a body-worn camera from one of the officers that was just behind Sergeant Kramer in the line that was forming up in front of the public safety building. At the time, as I mentioned, these officers were positioned between the courthouse and the public safety building in the courtyard area. It takes approximately 22 seconds from the time that the officers leave that gated area to go over and the interaction occurs between Mr. Net and Sergeant Kramer. You can hear in the video that the officers are providing commands similar, or what they're trained to do is say, move back or get back, and you will hear those commands. I will warn you that there is some strong language contained in this video. This is Sergeant Kramer in the front with the yellow. And the next video that will be played is the same orientation that I talked about from before. It's the camera that is, and if you go to the next slide, sir. The camera is actually positioned in the same place, so it's north, looking south. The public safety building will be up on this area of it. It's been zoomed in to a certain degree just so you can have a wider field of vision here on the screen. There's an area where you'll see members of the crowd throwing objects at the building, breaking the windows with the bats, and then disappearing back into the crowd. So they'll go and do the act of violence and then return back ultimately into the crowd. It appears that there's other members of the media in here as well, and I'll address that as we go along throughout the video. You can play the video, sir. the top right-hand corner, this is where the baseball bat is taken to the window to be broken out, and then the subject disappearing back into the crowd. So this is the second wave going back into just prior to the public order unit coming out. You'll see at the top left another, what we believe to be a photographer or a member of the media. You'll see several. It appears that there's one member of the media with a shoulder-mounted video camera as well. In a moment here, you'll see the public order unit come from the top left-hand portion of the screen and then move along the top section of the screen. This is the public order unit coming out from that gated area that I described before. I'd also like to take a moment, if we could pause the video, and to recognize some of the members of the community that we're trying to assist in moving the crowd back. I know the chief had mentioned this in the past, that this is where you're seeing that as well too. This is the incident, the interaction from a different vantage point between Sergeant Kramer and Mr. Knapp. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you. So after conducting a complete investigation, speaking to both parties involved and the two witnesses, I have determined that the force used by Sergeant Todd Kramer while performing his official duties was reasonable and necessary. Secondly, he did not violate any of our policies and procedures. It was never his intent to hurt or knock Mr. Nett to the ground. Our goal was to clear the area to allow the public order unit to effectively engage the individuals responsible for assaulting and damaging government facilities. Both the mayor and I have publicly and privately apologized to Mr. Nett. Some of you may question as to why we are apologizing if I have said that I felt like that the officer's action was both reasonable and necessary, and that is a couple of things. First of all, it was never his intent to knock Mr. Nett to the ground. It was never his intent for Mr. Nett to have those minor scrapes on his arms, elbows, that he received as a result of this, and also some minor damage to two lenses. But I felt that it was necessary for us to apologize to that because we certainly recognize that the media has a right to do their jobs when these kinds of things are going on. The issue that we had here is that we felt also that the sergeant had a job to do. His job was to make sure that we had a clear area to engage the individuals that was responsible for that, but apologizing for the unintentional parts of that, we felt like that it was appropriate. Going forward, I view this as a teachable moment. We are formally requesting that members of the media to train with our unit and share information on how we can avoid incidents like this in the future. We would also like to jointly develop a credential that will easily be recognizable to both law enforcement and also functional to members of the press. We view the media as a partner, and we want to do everything we can to ensure they have a safe space to perform a very important function of our society. At this time, I will take your questions in reference to this incident.
If I could just add before you do questions, just a couple other things. I want to be clear on the training. The purpose of inviting the media to training is not to tell you how to do your jobs. The purpose is, again, for all parties involved to learn, to make sure that everyone understands how to operate safely in the same space under these type of incidents. So as the chief said, this is a learning moment for all of us here. And again, we want to use this as an opportunity to do better, and ultimately to make sure that this never happens again. Again, this is not something that should have happened, that we wanted to happen, certainly, but hopefully never will. That's the goal here. It was also, I think, significant for me to know that as part of the investigation, that Sergeant Kramer indicated that he was not aware that Mr. Nett was a member of the media. I think that's critically important because, again, as I've tried as mayor to make sure, whether it's the police department, our communications team, or everyone else that works for the city, that they understand the importance of the media, the value of the media, and being a partner in making sure that we are able to share information with the public. So that was important as well. As was, the role. This has been a learning process for me too, and I've learned a lot about police policy and procedures, and learning one of the first questions I asked myself when I saw the initial 3-second video was, why did that specific officer break formation to engage with Mr. Nett? And I had subsequently learned that his role as sergeant and leading that section of the unit gave him the authority. He's the one that's supposed to do that if they feel the need. So again, I've learned a lot in this process. I still feel very badly for Mr. Nett that it happened. And again, I think an apology is appropriate, and it's an opportunity for all of us to learn. So again, with that, Chief and I, Deputy Mayor, happy to answer questions about this or anything else we discussed today.
Chief, one of the things you added to the use of force policy was provide with language about de-escalation. Do you feel that there was an appropriate time to de-escalate this situation before use of force?
I do, sir. And in this example, de-escalation was by, I believe, 5 or 6 officers that were in front of Sergeant Kramer that was giving Mr. Nett instructions to back up and to get back. And then also you can see in the clip on 3 or 4 different times that Sergeant Kramer actually directly says to Mr. Nett to back up and to move back. So I see that as a form of de-escalation, and all of that was done prior to us physically making contact with him. 20 years, sir.
Was there an opportunity for the sergeant and Dennis to actually exchange ideas with each other?
We made a proposal to do just that. We couldn't come to an agreement on the terms of that with the leadership from Syracuse.com, but it was proposed.
What was the sticking point?
The sticking point was that they wanted Sergeant Kramer to apologize for everything that he did in this moment. My apology was very specific, that we apologize for Mr. Nett being knocked to the ground. We apologize for any injuries that he incurred as a result of that. But I was not apologizing for the actions of the sergeant on that day, because I felt like that the force he used was reasonable and necessary in that moment, and that it was a part of his job. The leadership in Syracuse.com asked for a complete apology, or they were not willing to sit down.
How are the body cameras shared with officers? Are they given it a personal one, or are they exchanged over different shifts? How is that work in terms of dispersal?
The body cameras were given by reverse seniority when we began to disperse them as a part of our testing them. I believe that there are 105 or so that are on the street right now. We're in the process of trying to upgrade that to get a full contingency of our agency that will be ultimately wearing those cameras. Much of that was a financial decision, some of which that was kind of caught up in a wrinkle with us going through a pandemic and the many things going on in our community. So administratively, we got kind of sidetracked at some point. I'm happy to tell you that we've got that back on track. and we're in the process of rolling that out.
Just if I could be clear with Tommy, I think it's important to note that the individual cameras are assigned to individual
Yes.
officers, which is
Yes.
why you can't use those 105 to cover specific
Right.
shifts. That's the challenge.
Chief, can you look at the process of getting more body-worn cameras? How does that work?
Well, we have several cameras that are already on the street that are let's say, for example, a Series 2. Well, today there's a Series 3 or Series 4 that Axon actually puts out. So we're in the process of upgrading all of the cameras that we currently have on the street and then adding to the full contingency, which I believe is about 230 or so that will ultimately have the camera. So we need to replace the ones that we have on the street so that they have the most up-to-date current one, and then additionally give officers cameras who have not had a camera that will get us to about 230 or so.
I'll also add that the process for being able to obtain these cameras are through grant dollars. So we have secured grant dollars through the U.S. DOJ, Department of Justice. Each grant also has to have a match, which is where we've been in COVID trying to budgetarily find out how we can match those dollars. And to the chief's point, in the process of getting approval to spend the money and buy the cameras, we had some back and forth glitches about process. But we are fully committed to making sure that we are equipping our officers with body-worn cameras. We see that them as an actual additional tool to them to be able to do their jobs effectively.
How much is the city match to date for these grants?
So for the cameras we're working on right now, it is about $385-ish thousand that we have to match. Each camera in full equipment and preparing them for ability for officers to use them probably costs about $9,000.
Do you think the financial impact of COVID-19 is going to affect this at all?
I hope not. It definitely has affected our ability to actually find the match dollars to be able to purchase them. We're actually going to be preparing legislation for the council now that we've been able to secure it, but it continues to be, as we continue to equip our officers to do the best job possible, invaluable tool that we must have. So we're going to have to figure out how to be able to pay for them going forward.
It's a priority.
Yes, sir. Well, that's something that we have discussed already in theory as to seeing the value in it. It will, to the mayor's point, it is certainly not an exercise where we're attempting to tell the media how to do their jobs. The purpose of the training is for both the public order unit and media to be able to learn to share space during these very tense moments that would allow both of them to effectively do their jobs. Training will help with that, and I think it will also familiarize the individuals that are responsible for carrying out those respective duties so that we're not meeting on the field of play during very tense moments and we're not familiar with each other. Thus far, the only media outlet that we've been discussing this with would be Syracuse.com, but it's open to all media outlets.
There was mention of their new credentials, not just wearing the credentials. Are you talking about bigger credentials? What do you mean?
I don't have an example of what that's going to look like. That's why this needs to be a joint endeavor, because I was very specific in my language in that we want the credential to be easily recognizable by law enforcement, but also functional for the press. Because we don't want to give you something that will unintentionally put a target on you. You may be doing something from your operational standpoint that you may not want to be identified as the press in that moment. And those are some of the things that we need to talk about and discuss to be able to learn more about what each individual or organization does, and that's part of the training.
Use of force policy, also risk factors that should be considered when weighing whether to use force. Some of those include immediacy and severity of the threat, the seriousness of the suspected offense, whether the subject could be resisting. Can you tell me which of these factors would be used to justify use of force?
Immediacy of the threat. Immediately preceding our officers deploying in front of the building, we were under attack. That's the immediacy. We deployed the public order unit in order to try to attempt to stop the individuals for doing so. And then what was the second one that you said? Seriousness of the suspected offense, that I think that anyone objectively looking at this to say that someone is attempting to break the windows out of the courthouse and police headquarters, both of which that were occupied, will tell the seriousness of the threat and the fact that they were actively taking bottles and bricks and things while they were attempting to do that. And then when you talk about the resistance of that, I believe there was something you alluded to. Mr. Nett was asked multiple times to step back and to move out of the way. I don't think that anyone, regardless of what you think about both sides of this issue, would think that it would be reasonable under these circumstances to have someone standing in between police and individuals who have attempted to assault the building that we're in. No one would think that that's reasonable. And I understand that the optics of this, of seeing a gentleman knocked to the ground, I get that. But we have to have a clear path to be able to do our job. And I think that the officer's action in this example was both reasonable and necessary, with some unintentional consequences that happened as a result of it. When you roll out during that moment, you don't know who's a part of the threat. Again, as the Sergeant Russin alluded to, at the time that we encountered Mr. Nett, Mr. Sergeant Kramer said he did not know that Mr. Nett was the media. We later learned that, obviously, but at the time that he didn't know that. Being a part of the threat is one thing. Let's say that we give Mr. Nett credit for you were not responsible for throwing any of the rocks and bottles, nor were you responsible for breaking out the windows. You still can't stand in between us and the people who are responsible for it. No reasonable person would think that that makes any kind of common sense.
To play devil's advocate, though, you say that the officer didn't know that Dennis was with the media. There's also so much chaos going on. Who's to say that he actually heard them saying, get out of the way, and they were referring to
I think it's a fair
Excellent point. And Mr. Nett, in his comments, he did say that he heard the officers, both the individuals coming in, the initial officers, I think there were 5 or 6 of them, and that he did at some point hear the other officers speaking to him. I believe he was about to move before we made contact with him. So he heard their instructions. He himself said he was focused in on doing his job. He was trying to get camera footage. And who doesn't want that $1 million shot? If you're a camera person, that's his Super Bowl moment. I get that, but he didn't comply with the instructions that we clearly gave him, which put him again in harm's way. And we have to look at this also from a safety standpoint. If we're getting ready to, we're deploying less lethal and lethal weapons standing in front of this building. You don't want people standing in between you and possible threats when we're getting ready to take action.
Yeah, I support the chief's decision. Again, this has been a learning process for me. It doesn't mean that I like what happened, and as I said, my goal is for it to never happen again. But ultimately, again, I said this is the chief's decision. If I disagreed with it, I'd let him know I support it. But that doesn't mean that I think that it was a good outcome. And again, I hope we learn from it. I hope it never happens again.
The first 3 officers at the Mark Avenue scene did not have body-worn cameras, correct?
I can't remember in what order the cameras. There was someone in that line that had a camera, sir, but there were some that did, some that did
Tommy
not.
switched topics on you. The question was about Mark Ave.
Oh, clear pivot question. What's your question, sir?
The first 3 officers on Mark Avenue did not have a body-worn camera.
I believe you are correct, but I may be wrong about the 3. I know the initial responding officer that was involved in the actual shooting did not have a camera. I know that there were a couple of other individuals that were on the scene, but I know that at some point during that very brief encounter, some officer arrived on the scene when we were recovering the gun that the gentleman had, and that was captured on the camera. So I don't know if that was in the 3, was that number 4 or 5, but the initial responding officers, I believe you are correct, that they did not have a camera.
Okay, and because of that, I know the current priority is the reverse seniority. But given a city like this where we have an officer involved shooting, I'm sure you want that camera there. Is there going to be any conversation of maybe switching on that style of reverse seniority, but maybe equally have it among ships? So that at 5 a.m. shift just has as many body worn cameras in use as say, in that big ship?
Well, I can tell you that the method through which we did it in the past was based upon reverse seniority. That happened prior to my arrival. The fact that was used as the mechanism to disperse these cameras tells me that probably at some point union conversation probably became a part of it, or there was some kind of agreement that would be how we would roll it out without having to go into some kind of long drawn out disagreement as to who wears the camera. Ultimately, it is a management decision, and we're going to determine who will have the camera, but I believe that decision was made considering those few things.
Do you personally think that's the most effective method?
I think the most effective method is for us to have every desired person that we consider that has high volume of contact with the public to be wearing a camera, and then the appropriate training given to them prior to receiving that camera, and then the policies and procedures in place to give them guidance as to how they're to be used and accountability when they do not.
Yeah, and just to be clear, because I was around before the chief was, that to the chief's point, the ideal scenario is you get exactly how many body cameras you need and you deploy them equitably. Given the cost, that just we weren't able to do that. So my feeling was that, again, when I came in, there were 16. We were able to secure state funding, and so my feeling was that the sooner we can get cameras out, the better. And those cameras, again, while we didn't have them on this particular incident, and again, I can't tell you how frustrating that is. You saw how we benefited from some body-worn camera in this incident. We've had previous officer-involved shootings that included body camera footage. So some is better than none, but all is the ideal and something we're working towards as quickly as possible.
I can change gears to the governor's executive order today.
Yeah.
You said before that change tends to be slow, reform tends to be slow. You've got people first deadline on making a number of these reforms. Do you think that's realistic? Do you think you have to make changes to the department by April 1st?
So the question was, governor's executive order requires the plans to be in place, adopted by the local legislature by April 1st, 2021. I'm not concerned about that deadline for a few reasons. One, from the moment that we walked through this door, speaking for myself and the deputy mayor, police accountability, police reform, improving police community relations has been a priority. And we have made significant and steady progress in that direction. To your point, Chris, about the pace of that change, undoubtedly the protests that have occurred and the attention placed on this issue increases the sense of urgency. And so we have used that as an opportunity to accelerate our process. Deputy Mayor, I think as recently as this morning, had convened an internal working group to begin identifying what our next steps are in our police reform agenda. So when I spoke with the governor's office this morning, again, they acknowledged that the work that we had already done. I had indicated that we would simply fold in whatever the governor's requirements were into our existing process. And going back to my college days, deadlines always helped. So I'll gladly accept that. But we're also not going to wait until April 1st, 2021 to make changes. We're gonna make them as quickly as we can.
In terms of diversifying the police department, can you talk about what that's going to take in terms of the hiring process?
Yeah, Chief, do you want to talk about
Yeah, please.
recruitment?
One of the things that has already happened, we certainly thank our partners over in the county Civil Service Commission. There's a new written exam, and it was my understanding that The attempt was to remove some of the biases that many people felt like that were in that the existing exam, and that to make sure that it is more reflective of a 21st century exam that is used as an entrance exam for today. Our brothers and sisters in fire have used the list, and we have also, I believe, have our first list with names on it from the new testing, and I think that we're seeing some good early results as a result of that. I will although pump our brakes a little bit to tell you that we haven't had our major problem has not been getting minorities to take the test. Our issues have been getting minorities through the entire process. And then that's where the issues lie, which is why we think it's important for us when the school system is back in place to work on these cadet recruit types of programs so that we can begin to grow our own fruit to meet some of these young people when they have this inspiration in their eyes and heart about careers in criminal justice and law enforcement, to make sure that they're making the appropriate decisions that will not have long-standing impact on them when they're adults ready to try to do something constructive in their lives. So it's not easy. There's not a one thing that needs to be addressed. We're in the process of doing kind of a top-to-bottom assessment of that, but there's really no one specific thing that's going to turn us in a direction to get the kinds of numbers that we're seeking.
This would be a question for both mayor and the chief, but sort of returning back to that April 1st deadline. You, Mayor, have had a history of community outreach and making decisions like hiring for the chief.
Right.
Is there going to be similar efforts when drafting this?
Yeah, I haven't looked at the specific order language yet, but based on my conversation, the governor's order does require some level of community dialogue and discussion. And again, that's something that we welcome. We lean into that. We had a year-long dialogue led by Deputy Mayor Owens to get our chief. Once the chief came in, we spent much of last summer going back around the city, having those meetings. So that's something that we're very comfortable with, we believe in, and we'll certainly use to make sure we're in compliance with the governor's order. So the question is, the passage of 50A by the state legislature, which relates to the availability of police disciplinary records, how that may impact recruitment?
I can't think of something off the top of my head, sir, that would be negatively or positively impacted as a result of that. I think culturally will be the biggest shift for us because things that have been probably for most of the individuals who are here today in their entire career, those records were always not disclosable. So I think culturally speaking, that will be a major shift for us to know that now that those things are now made public.
Yeah.
It does some of the things in the governor's order. Do you know, like, where about are you? Are you halfway there, do you think, or, a lot of the way there? Do you have any sense of where the city stands in front of that?
Well, I think regardless of the governor's order, my position has been that we've made significant progress over the past 2.5 years. But as evidenced by the people out protesting, we have a long way to go. So again, without having read the governor's specific order, it's hard for me to say exactly where we are within that process. But based on my conversations with the governor's office, it sounds to me like they, while they will provide some general guidance about where we might want to look, use of force policy being an example of that, they're not going to be particularly prescriptive about specific changes that we enact. I think the governor recognizes that that each community, each city, each law enforcement agency is different and is at different stages. Again, all of this we are very comfortable with. I'm sure there are agencies that won't be. So again, without having read the specific language, I can't say exactly where we are, but I think we're all, we all have from now until April 1st, 2021 to engage in that process, and I don't anticipate any issues there. So we currently have 104 employees on temporary unpaid leave. There was a number of factors that went into it, especially during the early phase of New York on pause. There were job functions that just weren't able to be performed remotely, and so that was the logical place to start with individuals that weren't able to perform their function. We also did look at it through the lens of a financial impact on the individuals, so knowing how much someone can collect through unemployment and the enhanced federal benefit, and trying to do no harm financially for our employees. And that was also a consideration as we rolled out the voluntary leave policy. But anyone can avail themselves of it. They don't. But again, we tried to minimize the impact on the staff members. Yeah, our HR department has already assisted and will be continue to be prepared to assist with our employees as they seek unemployment benefits.
Chief, going back to the question about police reform, maybe you have a better understanding of where that progress has been since you've been to the Syracuse Police Department in terms of the more travel of police reform.
Well, I can tell you that I would say the best, I guess, description of that I would give you is, having 18 months or so sitting in the seat as chief of police for the city of Syracuse, that I feel like that the police department is a strong agency. The fact that they have been accredited for a number of years, many of the things that have been spoken about in the public, they already existed. There's no question that we saw an opportunity for improvement with some of our policies, which is why you saw the new use of force, while we're reviewing other policies, while we had the LGBTQ policy that came about, and we've got a contract with Lexpol, which is an organization that helps keep you current with those things, and to make sure that it's reflective of best practices that we all should be subscribing to. I will tell you that training is a major issue with any agency that calls itself professional or progressive, but it starts with hiring the right people at the front door. So we have many of those balls that are already in play. We certainly recognize that our organization needs to pivot and probably respond to some of the things that are being brought up today that will come about in this reform. I want my organization, including myself, to approach this with open mind, open heart, because there are some times that we may get our feelings hurt as to the types of things that are being discussed by the public that they expect of their police department. But that's why you sit down and have a community dialogue, while you sit down and talk about things and do them jointly, because if police are the only ones describing or defining what we need to be doing, we're probably going to be disconnected from the people that we're trying to serve. So I think that self-evaluation, accreditation is a part of that, and then making sure that we're reflective of the values, the individuals that we hire, our accountability systems, transparency. All of those things are a part of that professional cocktail that I think make an organization, a police department that the community can be proud of.
There's one piece of the governor's executive order that specifically talks about reviewing use of force policies.
Yes, sir.
So you agree, the department has rewritten this policy. Is that work done, or will that policy be revisited?
Our policies will continue to be reviewed, updated, continuous improvement, because I can tell you that one of the things that I recently had, conversations I had with Sergeant Russin, is that hearing some of the phrases, the terms, the concerns raised by members of the public, there are things that we already do and that we already have in place. The problem is I think that unintentionally we have written them with the author in mind, meaning that the police audience, that we need to explicitly illuminate those things so that the public can see that we have a duty to care and custody, provide immediate EMS types of things, not to where we solely understand it, but the public understands what we expect of our police officers. And I think that we have some opportunity for improvement with that, so you'll see some modifications to many of our policies with that in mind.
So the question is, what services would I like to deliver to city residents that I may not be able to because of COVID-19 and or fiscal restraints? Pools. I'll start right there. I know I've talked a lot about it. I regularly get asked about our pools, and I've said throughout, and now in light of the state's recent guidance about pools, that every day that goes by, it becomes less a decision, a health decision, and more a financial decision. We're already past the point of opening all of our pools. I mentioned last week the Parks Department has given me a plan to open up to 4 pools. So we're reviewing that plan, making sure it's aligned with state guidelines, and then we're going to have to come up with the money. And every day that goes by that the federal government doesn't act is a day that goes by that we can't open up our pools. So that's the first one that comes to mind. But I think right now I'm less focused on services that we're unable to provide now. I'm worrying about a month from now, 2 months from now. We have a draft contingency spending plan that takes $25 million out of our budget, and it's ugly. We will all feel the impact of that if we have to go down that road, and no department will be spared, from Chief Buckner's to Chief Mons, from the Parks Department to the mayor's office. Everyone is going to feel that pain, and because of that, our constituents are going to feel that pain. And it doesn't have to be that way. The federal government just has to do their job.
Switching back to body cameras, to be at the gold status of fully equipped, when would you like to see that happen? Is there a realistic date that you can say it's happening?
So I mentioned earlier the importance of deadlines and motivating me. I've also learned not to impose false deadlines or deadlines that I can't meet. So I think, Tommy, that based on what I know of where we are in the process, I think it's reasonable to expect, and we're talking about months to get close to fully equipped. It looks like we may have a bit of a financial gap to get over the finish line, but in the next tranche, Deputy Mayor, we're hoping to get another 100 or so, would you say?
Yes.
About that. So, again, I don't want to commit to a specific deadline now. It's a priority. Again, the good news is we do have funding in place to take a big step forward over the next 2-3 months. But again, to get to the finish line is, still not quite clear.
Cost-wise, would it be consistent with the federal grants around $9,000 per camera, or can that fluctuate as the years go on?
Well, the cost is going to be the cost, and we don't know where the market is going to go when it comes to the cost. The grants, there are typically a max you can apply for. So in most cases, you would apply for whatever amount we could get, and then we'd have to identify, in most cases, a match.
Mayor, another question. Is there a plan for when playgrounds will open or basketball hoops will be put back on?
Yeah, so the question is about playgrounds and basketball hoops. I get a lot of those questions too. I'm less concerned about playgrounds than I am about basketball hoops, because just inherently when you're playing basketball, you make physical contact. You don't have to with playgrounds, although it's hard to tell little kids, that they can't get close to each other. So we do have some new guidance from the state that is helpful in informing that decision, and I'm going to be working with the Parks Department on a plan, but right now we don't have a specific update on when playgrounds and basketball hoops open. I desperately want it to be soon, because our young people are really suffering through this pandemic, and they need positive ways to invest their energy, but again, we want to make sure that they're safe.
Any update on fireworks that you're driving crazy?
So my update is fireworks still drive me crazy, but it's a tough one. Trust me when I say that I thought long and hard about calling Chief Buckner up in the midst of a global pandemic, in the midst of a huge spike in violence, and say, Chief, I need you to work on fireworks. But I have always felt, and the Chief's heard me say this a lot of times, that we can't afford to, it's easy to say we've got bigger fish to fry, we can't deal with fireworks, we've got, shots fired, stabbings, and of course we have to prioritize those. But if we don't focus on those quality of life issues that aren't just about quality of life. We know that fireworks present health and safety hazards, whether it's the potential of fires, the potential to impact people with PTSD. There's real issues there. And again, last night they were booming, and I didn't text the chief. I gave him the night off. They were booming in my neck of the woods. So I understand that we have to prioritize, but we cannot allow ourselves to forego focusing on those quality of life issues, or we're just going to. I believe that it just moves us closer to more people having to deal with the very serious issues that we're trying hard to mitigate. So, in terms of plans, the police department, and I'll let the chief if he wants to say any more, but they do have a plan for enforcement that they're going to begin to roll out. We've had conversations with our other partner law enforcement agencies around. Looking at where some of these fireworks are coming from and whether or not that there can be some enforcement around bringing them across state lines. But as we're working on the kind of the enforcement component, we're trying to stay focused on education, outreach, making sure people know that they are illegal, that they are unsafe. And so it's a work in progress. It's I'm already imagining the tweets that will come in on the 4th of July. Mayor, how's your plan coming along for fireworks? This is an issue that's been a problem for a long time. We've speculated about whether or not it's gotten worse. Sometimes I think I'm just getting older and crankier. Some have speculated that more people are home because of the pandemic, and so we're hearing them more. Either way, it's a quality of life issue, it's a health and safety issue, and we can't afford to just let any of those go by. But again, do I want to criminalize people that are using fireworks? Do I want to ask the chief to put his officers out into our neighborhoods arresting kids for letting off fireworks? That's not my goal. I just want people to be safe and to have some peace and quiet. The discussion and debate around the Columbus statue, around a lot of our historical statues throughout the country, is one that I think, similar to what we're talking about with police accountability, I'm proud to say we've already been engaged in that debate. Going back to the time when I ran for this office and I was asked how I felt about the Columbus statue, and I've said from day one that I have concerns about the message that statue sends to our constituents. What I've learned from the discussion is that there are a lot of passionate feelings about it, and so rather than just making a decision, an executive decision to remove it, I'm a big believer in dialogue. So we engaged with Interfaith Works. We've now been involved over the course of nearly 2 years in having dialogues where we've invited members of the Italian American community that feel passionately about this statue, members of our neighbors from the Onondaga Nation, other community stakeholders that vary on the spectrum of their opinions about that statue. And we've had a dialogue. And while that hasn't led to a decision necessarily on what exactly to do with that statue, I guarantee that everyone in that room in the course of those sessions would tell you that they learned a lot in that process. They learned a lot about themselves and others. And again, while there wasn't necessarily consensus on the statue, there was a consensus that we wanted whatever we did with that statue to be a source of healing and not a source of division. And so again, people want change; they want it quickly, and oftentimes these processes are not as fast as people would like. But I can tell you that we're going to continue that process. It may or may not eventually end up with a decision specific to the statue, but we've made progress on that front. One of the things that we're going to do is release the report that was produced by Interfaith Works, so everyone in the community that wasn't involved can get up to speed on what has transpired up to this point. So it's ongoing, but again, given our country's history of oppression, particularly among indigenous peoples and communities of color, is something that we need to come to a reckoning on, and we need to be able to talk about it. And I think that that's the first step is being able to talk openly about it. That's what we're doing.
For any period you have this over what type of communication have you had with the organizers of the youth led protest, what is happening today, and how seriously are you taking their demands into account?
So the question was, have we been in touch with the youth-led protest that's happening this evening, and how seriously we take their demands? There's been a number of demands that have been put forth by a number of different organizations. So I want, out of respect for all of those organizations, I don't want to make assumptions or guess on which demands associate with which organizations. I will just say, in short, I respect all of these organizations and individuals voicing their opinions. I respect all of their demands, and I'm prepared to discuss and ultimately answer them at the appropriate time. But as far as actual communication, Chief, if you just want to touch on that real quick.
Yes, sir. Our events office that will be managing that. Obviously, there are a number of people that have indicated that they plan to attend the event. I will just lean on what I've been saying throughout our protests. The vast majority of individuals that have protested in our city have done so peacefully and legally. This specific organization has been in constant communication with us, updating us on the things that are going on with the event and what they expect. Those are always good indicators for us, so we appreciate that. As an organization, public safety organization, we will be prepared to make sure that they are allowed to exercise their First Amendment rights, protect them when they go move about the city, and then be prepared for the unknown that may come up as a result of someone doing something sinister.
Last question.
I guess I'm more about communicating with them, but it's not about the protest, but about their demands. You said you take all of the demands into account, but sitting down and talking with them about their demands, what does that mean?
So I'll just say that I have not had the opportunity to sit down directly with official representatives of the different organizations and protesters to talk about specific demands. I'm ready and willing to do that. I've tried to put that out to make sure that those organizations are aware of that. But I want to be respectful of them and their process, and so I'm ready to engage when they are. But that's this is their process, and they own it, and I'm very respectful of that. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a good weekend. Be safe.